In Portland, Maine, a beautiful young woman vanishes one night while out on the town.
We have no crime scene. We have no body.
Is she alive or dead?
It was unusual that a young lady goes missing from a nightclub downtown Portland and is never seen again.
Desperate, the top detective turns to a psychic for help.
And immediately, when he started talking, she was right there.
Can the psychic's mysterious visions help police to find Amy?
Help them find me, help them find me, help them get me out.
Portland, Maine, a peaceful city in historic New England. But on October 21st, 2001, that peace was shattered. Amy St Laurent, a 25-year-old administrative assistant and Portland native, disappears into the night. Amy was charming, fun-loving, and according to everyone, reliable.
Amy's a responsible young woman who didn't turn up for work on Monday, not prone to disappearing and not getting her cat fed and leaving her personal belongings behind.
I miss her. I want her back. Anything anyone can do to help would be really appreciated.
It wasn't just her family who were desperate to find Amy. The entire city was looking for her.
Portland is a small city. Everybody was aware of it. Amy's picture was everywhere. You couldn't walk a block without seeing her photograph.
Deputy Chief Joe Lachlan of the Portland Police is in charge of a team of detectives working the case.
It was unusual that a young lady goes missing from a nightclub downtown Portland and is never seen again. I mean, she just basically disappears. And there are no answers. The public's demanding answers.
And one of our best reporters went downtown, and the family was hanging up posters with her picture, and they were visibly distraught. And I think everybody just couldn't believe what was going on, and their hearts just went out to the family.
What police know is that at the Pavilion nightclub, Amy became separated from her friend around midnight. Though he searches, he can't find her in the crowded club. Frustrated, he leaves. After that, she vanishes.
Portland police continue their search for Amy St Laurent, the 25-year-old administrative...
Lieutenant Lachlan is feeling the heat. He has to find Amy, but has few leads.
And police are asking anyone with information to come forward.
We had zip. We had nothing. We had some speculation, conjecture. We have no crime scene. We have no body. We have no physical evidence.
5 days after Amy disappeared, driving into police headquarters, Lachlan tunes in a voice on his car radio.
Q97.9, this is Vicky Monroe with Spirit Messenger.
It is a moment that will change the course of the investigation.
Hi, Vicky. My name's Jackie. Hi, Jackie. Jackie, has your mother and father passed?
Yes, both my parents are dead.
At radio station Q97.9 in downtown Portland, psychic Vicky Monroe is hosting her weekly call-in show. She's helping listeners connect, so she says, with their dead loved ones.
I see them very clearly defined. I hear them, and I also get a sensation of whatever they're feeling or how they might have passed.
Your parents are both fine, alive and well, as they put it on the other side. Your mother says, though, that you were there when she passed?
Actually, I was.
And were you holding her hand?
I was.
And did you tell her it was okay to go?
I did.
Okay.
So I was listening to the radio. I said, you know what? I'm going to call this woman when I get to work and see if she can tell me where Amy is.
Can a psychic radio show host really help a cop find a missing woman?
Why not? Why not? My frame of mind is perhaps this can trigger some thought process in me, some further inquiry to the detectives, some information that we may not have thought about. Joe Lachlan, I'm a lieutenant at the Portland Police Department. I'm wondering if perhaps you can help me with something. Have you heard of the Amy St Laurent case?
Lieutenant Lachlan's phone call triggers an extraordinary reaction.
I was shaking. I know that I started to cry.
It was last seen at one of the nightclubs called the Pavilion.
But I was just so stunned. shocked and really surprised because he's telling me about this missing person who then just starts to appear right in front of my face. There is a person coming in, and
She came right through for me.
Immediately, Vicky gets a powerful image of Amy.
she's exclaiming that her name is Amy, gray sweatshirt, writing on the side.
I kept asking her, what does that say?
Wearing...
And she said, Pratt Whitney. And that was where she worked at the time.
Okay.
For the psychic, it can mean only one thing.
Okay. My first response was that sick feeling in my stomach always usually happens when I know somebody's passed away. So immediately there was a feeling of, or a sense of, this girl's passed.
Monroe tells Lachlan Amy is dead. And then she goes a step farther.
I knew this is a murder case.
And he's really not prepared for what she tells him next.
Okay, she keeps repeating. Amy's repeating.
JJJ is definitely the name of the man that killed me.
In Portland, Maine, 25-year-old Amy St Laurent has been missing for 5 days. Is she alive? Has she been abducted? Where is she? The police are stumped. Desperate for clues, Lieutenant Joe Lachlan asks Vicky Monroe, a local radio personality and psychic, for help. Monroe has a terrifying vision of Amy. She's dead, the victim of a brutal murder, and something more.
I saw Amy. She described the gentleman.
His name is Jeff.
It was definitely the name of the man that killed me.
Jeff. That's what Amy's saying.
And he killed her.
She got into a vehicle with...
New evidence has revealed that the last person to see Amy was a man by the name of Jeff Gorman. No one but the police has that information.
I mean, it was uncanny. It was uncanny information, no doubt. It starts a conversation. It starts a dialogue. It starts rethinking. It starts discussion and argument, which is good for the case, because that's what we constantly do. Most cases start with a crime scene and some place to start. Here, we are trying to find a starting place. And ultimately, we found that starting place with Jeffrey Russell Gorman.
While Lieutenant Lachlan heads up the investigation, 2 veteran detectives lead the search for Amy. Scott Heracles from Maine State Police and Danny Young from Portland PD.
Gorman was just the last person known to be with Amy St Laurent. And at that point, we had to focus on him until we could either clear him or put the case together.
Gorman is hauled in. As he is questioned, Lachlan watches for signs of deception. If the psychic is right, this man knows what happened to Amy.
Was this guy then Eric? Is he around? I don't know. She said that he left her.
Gorman, who wanted to appear very cooperative, was in fact very reluctant. He would come and give you his story, but he wouldn't do anything further.
I played a lot of pool.
Under close questioning by Detective Young, Gorman freely admits meeting Amy at the Pavilion nightclub and taking her to a party at his friend's apartment.
Do all the time. It's just play a bunch of people. We just go back over and drink. Okay.
There were 3 people, herself included. They got in the car.
I think that she left with Jeffrey Gorman. Number one, she couldn't find her friend at the time. 2, Gorman knows a lot of people in a position of authority, and bouncers and bar persons and things of that nature, so she might have felt that ephemeral safety with him.
According to Gorman, Amy doesn't stay long at the party and he drives her back downtown.
I pulled up. I did not even put my car in park. Left it in drove. She says, I hope you remember my name. I'll call you tomorrow. All right.
But Gorman's story doesn't stack up.
Across the street from the Pavilion is a jewelry store. So they had a video camera that basically shot out through the glass into the road. We knew what Gorman had for a car, so we looked at the tapes for that time period, and Gorman's car never appeared. So that clearly indicates to us that he's lying.
At the time, he also says that there's a lot of activity here, that bouncers and persons are coming and going from the nightclub. We know that at that time of night that this place is a ghost town.
police dig into Gorman's background, they find a criminal history that stretches all the way to Florida.
His record included a lot of misdemeanor crimes and thefts and crimes of dishonesty. Knowing his background, going into Florida and Alabama and talking to the individual detectives and people down there, and we got the picture of Russ Gorman, Jeffrey Gorman, as someone we didn't trust, and nothing that he said, nothing that he said we could verify. Yeah, they did. Before leaving, after leaving the pavilion.
Gorman's suspicious behavior after the interview raises other red flags.
He has a piece of crap car that he never cleans, that he's driving around in, that his friend said a couple of days earlier, why don't you clean this thing up? And he says, oh, it's a piece of junk. There's no sense cleaning this car up. And the day after Amy was missing, that car was cleaned up, and it was immaculate. He starts changing his appearance. He shaves his head. He gets body piercings and tattoos. He's making all sorts of inquiries about polygraph and dealing with the police. He refuses to cooperate with us. He was indicating all sorts of what we call post-offense behavior, and we start building a case, starting with the fact that he never dropped her off.
So we've lost a little bit of time in there. I don't know where he went, what he was doing.
Jeff Gorman is now suspect number 1 in the disappearance of Amy St Laurent, just as psychic Vicky Monroe predicted.
I don't know if he was back.
And it was definitely Jeff. That is the name they had to go with. And I see it, yes, I see it.
But the psychic has even more powerful visions. Amy is showing Vicky where they can find her.
Then she shows me this area. It was wooded, very, very wooded.
I can hear water.
There's water. I could hear water. She also described that there was a house nearby that was significant to this Jeff person.
Near his home.
Police know Jeff Gorman often stays at his mother's house, located outside Portland in a heavily wooded area. New evidence shows he was close by the night Amy disappeared. He was stopped by police for a broken headlight at 2:45 in the morning.
He could only possibly travel in a small radius based on all the information that we had gathered.
This isn't too far from where he was stopped.
We established criteria for search areas. One of the areas is right near Gorman's mother's house, where he lived. We believe that Amy could be somewhere in that area.
Could this area be the dense woodland Monroe sees in her visions? It's 6 weeks since Amy vanished.
There was a huge amount of pressure on the police to solve this crime. First, because we didn't know if this would happen again to another young woman in the Old Port. And also just for her family to know that there was some resolution.
But at that time, it was just Gorman and Cush. This is at the...
The detectives became very attached to her. And in fact, at one point, because of who she was, they were referring to her as our Amy.
Amy was too sweet a girl. She was too good a person. So many of our cases, we're able to reason some of these things away. We still work very hard, but you can reason a lot away so you don't have to take a lot home with you that night. But Amy never left. She came home every night.
Lieutenant Lachlan actually asked me if I would speak to a woman named Diane Jenkins. Well, the names didn't match, so I honestly didn't know who that would be. And it ended up being Amy's mom. Diane came with me and she had a bag with her. And it contained a book and pictures. It was definitely confirmation for me that was Amy. That was the girl that I had seen.
Mrs. Jenkins, what I do is I see people that have passed away, and I can see Amy, and she's right behind you.
The vividness of Amy was very intense, and this time was going to show herself in complete form, right down to her tattoo and her sandals, so her mother would know, this is me. Don't even question this. This is me.
She's wearing a gray...
It was very important that I relay the message to her mother that I love you, you were a wonderful mother, you were all of these great things to me. I felt sad, but I also felt great relief in the respect that her mother knows at least this much, that she's okay and she's not suffering.
But now detectives face another obstacle, Mother Nature.
We had conducted many, many searches, and this was our last big effort.
Police need to work fast. It's early December, and heavy snowfall is in the forecast.
As we started the search in the morning, we were all very anxious to get moving because snow was coming. Snow was imminent. It was going to happen that day.
The snow may have prevented the cadaver dogs from actually indicating on the grave, which then would have been another 4 or 5 months.
Urgency really sums up how we were feeling. We had to find her.
Danny and Scott really believed that we were going to find her. I was just like, man, I don't know how we're going to do it. It's just the proverbial needle in a haystack.
Just as Monroe predicted, police now believe the answer to the mystery of Amy's disappearance lies buried in these woods.
This is very, very familiar territory to Jeffrey Russ Gorman. His mother's house is through the woods here, probably about 4/10 of a mile. These trails he's been through many, many, many times. He's fished these ponds. If you look over here, you can see probably 50 feet from us is water.
For hours, police scour the woods. And then,
around 2:30 in the afternoon, the search team was walking through this area, and they stepped on an area over here where the earth was soft and determined that it didn't feel right. They backed up and they looked, and they noticed some depression, soft earth, fresh shovel marks.
could this be what they were looking for?
The dogs first come through here, and they go immediately to this pine tree here, and they alert on the pine tree. From here, they go to this area where there was a grave.
Detective Young takes charge of the crime scene.
I'd taken some tools from my vehicle and dug down a little bit and searched, and I could feel basically an arm, or I could feel skin underneath.
The forensic dig continues late into the night. But is it Amy's body they have found? Has the psychic been right all along?
You need to help me get out. Help them find me, help them find me, help them get me out.
It's December 8th, 2001. For the past 6 weeks, finding Amy St Laurent has consumed the police in Portland, Maine.
Amy is the type of daughter you'd be proud to have. And I had a daughter, Amy, the same age. It hit home, hit very, very close to home.
Amy is the kind of victim, she's the kind of person we're supposed to protect. She's the reason we come to work. And we had to get it done for her.
Now they may be close. Psychic Vicky Monroe described where to look for her body.
I see a house, there's a house, there's a house, there's water. I could hear water.
It's Jeff.
She also told police the name of the person responsible.
The gentleman that did this to her was Jeff.
Jeff Gorman is the chief suspect in the investigation, but the psychic knows even more.
And then Amy told me that I'm under something. I can't get out.
What does she mean? Police are about to find out.
When we're doing the forensic exhumation, I do remember finding the piece of plywood, and what Vicky had told me resonated at that point, that she was under something.
And when the plywood is removed, a gray Pratt & Whitney sweatshirt, as seen in Monroe's vision, emerges from the damp, dark soil.
At that point, we knew that we had Amy.
From the moment we confirmed, it was very surreal. We were on autopilot immediately. I don't think we needed to sleep again for a couple of days. It was invigorating and a little bit of relief.
It's an emotional moment, a relief, and yet it confirms everyone's worst fear.
I think probably the most difficult part of this case is the day we discovered Amy and finding her remains and going through the forensic dig and exhumation. You know, you have this image of a young lady who had her whole life ahead of her, and you know, seeing that crime scene was very difficult for all of us.
In the moments that we found her, we got our first snowstorm of the season.
Yep. We were leaving the site when the snow started coming down, and it was a substantial storm, too.
We all were just amazed that if it was another day, we never would have found her. And Vicky Monroe had told me that she would be found before the first snow.
And I could see it on television, where they had found Amy and what she was wearing. I do this for a living. This shouldn't be a shock. I thought, oh my God.
How could Vicky Monroe have known so much about this terrible case? Did the spirit of Amy really tell her? Vicky said Amy had been murdered. She said the killer was named Jeff. She predicted he buried Amy under something near water close to a familiar house. She even knew about the gray sweatshirt.
I don't know how she could possibly have known any of this information.
I don't know if it's just something that I carried with me since I was born. Some people will say I'm cursed, and I say no. This isn't a curse. I feel blessed.
I can't explain it. I think human beings have sixth senses, or I know that I watch detectives develop another sense, another level of intellect or observation, and perhaps that's true.
Whatever the truth behind Monroe's extraordinary insights, the information she passed to police played an important role in finding Amy and her killer.
I think the biggest impact that her statements had on the investigation is that it stimulates conversation, it stimulates discussion, and that begets other information.
One day after Amy is found, police arrest Jeffrey Gorman and charge him with first-degree murder. At his trial, the terrible details of Amy's last night alive are revealed.
We will not know precisely what happened that night, but we believe that the assault started in the car.
After leaving the party, Gorman stops and forces himself on Amy. She resists, and he brutally assaults her.
He then takes a gun out and brings her to familiar ground. I believe Amy was taken up this road by force.
Hidden in the forest, under the cover of night, Gorman assaults and rapes Amy. Then, by a pine tree, he shoots her in the head. 2 days later, he returns to bury her next to the pond, covered by a cheap piece of plywood.
I often tell people that this is an unbelievable case. It was an unbelievable experience. It takes a lot out of you and pushes you against the wall. And I don't know how many times you can really handle that in a career, a case like this, one that you cannot afford to lose.
And there's no doubt in my mind that this man would kill again. This guy is serial sexual homicide.
In court, Gorman's own dark words finally seal his fate. prosecutors present a recording of Gorman's mother admitting to police that her son had confessed to her that he killed Amy. A brutal killer is found guilty and sentenced to 60 years in prison for the murder of Amy St Laurent.
Now that we have Jeffrey Russ Gorman behind bars, he will never be able to kill again. And this, to me, is sacred ground.
An elderly widow is brutally murdered in her home.
This was an absolute senseless crime.
Police have little evidence and no one's talking.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community.
But a psychic has disturbing visions of the crime.
She had been stabbed so many times.
Can a psychic's insights solve the mystery of who killed Rose Swartwood? Elmira, New York, an historic town of clapboard houses and white picket fences. A town Huckleberry Finn author Mark Twain once called home. A town unaccustomed to crime. But not on August 25th, 1988. On that day, 74-year-old Rose Swartwood, widowed and living alone, is found dead in her apartment. She'd been the victim of a shocking attack. Beaten, bitten, and stabbed to death.
I think the nature of the crime, being an elderly woman that lived alone, was very upsetting.
It caught a lot of the media attention and upset a lot of the people in the community.
I mean, it was a terrible, heinous crime.
Mike Moosey from the local sheriff's office and Corky Patterson from the Elmira Police Department are assigned to investigate this gruesome case.
Yeah, there hadn't been a murder in Elmira in several years.
Jim Pfeiffer is a journalist who covered the story.
What bothered people the most, I thought, was this is a woman who's innocent, who has no enemies. It could happen to me. You know, it isn't supposed to happen to anyone, but especially to people like this.
It was believed from the very beginning of this investigation that it was possibly a burglary gone to a homicide rather than a planned homicide. I think we felt quite strongly that this was not anticipated to be a homicide from the beginning, but more a burglary gone bad.
Moosey and Patterson face major problems. Despite the apparent frenzy of the murder, little forensic evidence was left behind by Rose's killers.
The crime scene was very cleaned up. There were some things disturbed still when the police arrived there, but it appeared they had scrubbed down the walls and the floors with some type of cleaning agent.
Not only this, but locals are reluctant to talk.
A lot of times people just would clam up, or they'd give them false information. So it would make it more difficult for the police, who in this community were used to quickly solving a crime.
Rose lived in one of Elmira's tougher neighborhoods, the Hawthorne Court housing project.
I believe there were people that felt they would be threatened if they cooperated with the police.
Scores of potential suspects are interviewed and eliminated. Only two rise to the top of the list. William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore, both local, both well known to police.
We were relatively certain who these suspects were and what their involvement in the crime was.
With little evidence to tie Cuddy and Moore to the crime scene and no witnesses prepared to come forward, the investigation gradually stalls.
There were so many people who were afraid that the killers were still in the community. Police being blamed for not doing a good job, when that wasn't the case. They were doing a good job. They just couldn't get a lot of cooperation, a lot of information.
Months pass with no new leads. The case grows cold. But detectives Moosey and Patterson don't give up. They're not about to let Rose Swartwood's killers away with murder. 2 years after her homicide, with nothing to lose, Detective Moosey decides to try something very different. He decides to enlist a psychic.
I had heard about Phil Jordan from other law enforcement agencies. I had never been to him before.
Phil Jordan is one of America's best-known psychics, with a strong track record of helping cops solve difficult crimes.
I have been working with the police for the past 35 years.
Jordan uses photographs to make a psychic connection to crime scenes.
When I work on a case, I will take a picture of the victim. And as I look at that picture, I start seeing things about that person.
Detectives decide to tell Jordan nothing about Rose Swartwood or her murder.
When Corky and Mike came to the first meeting, they brought a picture of Rose Swartwood with them. And I looked at that picture and did a reading.
Right away, Jordan surprises the police.
The perpetrators, I felt, came into the dwelling believing they were going to do a burglary, and they were surprised to find that there was a person in the house. And then I feel as though both the perpetrators felt as though the whole situation went completely wrong, that they had gotten much more involved than they wanted to in the crime itself.
Jordan claims his visions reveal not only what happened during the crime, but also what the killers did after.
Then I felt as though they would try to put things back the way they had found it.
Again, the cops are surprised. Jordan has just identified the reason their investigation has so little physical evidence. But the big question is, can he tell them who killed Rose Swartwood? To find out, they hand him a stack of photos.
I took probably between 50 and 75 mugshots of various people to see if any of them had any significance to him whatsoever.
We had pictures of people who had been suspects but ruled out, and we had pictures of people who we didn't think had any involvement whatsoever. No names on any of the photographs or anything.
Just quietly, we sat there for approximately 10 or 15 minutes as he flipped through several mugshots. And I noticed, as did Sergeant Patterson, he pulled out a picture of Bill Cuddy and set it aside. He then continued to flip through the photographs, and probably 20 or 30 photographs later, he pulled a mugshot of Demetrius Moore, and he laid that down.
I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
It was a moment that would change the course of a 2-year investigation.
When he pulled those two pictures out and set them aside, I was trying my best not to look at Sergeant Patterson, but he had pulled out our 2 prime suspects.
With no prior knowledge, how could the psychic have zeroed in on the 2 prime suspects?
Just about everything that he described was pretty much on the money.
But can a psychic's dark visions help police find justice for Rose Swartwood? For 2 years, Elmira, New York area detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been hunting the vicious killer of an elderly widow.
Very unusual for us to have a crime like that. It was extremely rare here.
With little evidence and no witnesses, the police investigation had hit a wall, until a psychic identifies the 2 prime suspects who, up to now, detectives haven't had the evidence to arrest.
When he completed going through all the photographs, he put the rest of them down and said that he felt the 2 that he had pulled out, that being the photographs of Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy, were in fact the 2 people that he felt were directly involved in the crime of the death of Rose Swartwood.
William Cuddy is a name very familiar to Elmira police.
Cuddy was doing time. He pled guilty in June of '89 to the sexual abuse charge that I had originally investigated him on.
William Cuddy was a suspect because a jailhouse informant had contacted Detective Moosey saying Cuddy had been bragging in jail about killing Rose. But when the detective tried to question Cuddy, the prisoner wouldn't talk.
He had an incredible loss of memory. He did not wish to remember any of the details and immediately posed a problem for us.
Demetrius Moore is another story.
Demetrius Moore was actually a neighbor of the victim and was questioned along with several other people as a potential suspect.
Moore has remained a suspect because he had a motive. He blamed Rose and her complaints about his loud music for his eviction from Hawthorne Court.
In fact, a few weeks prior to her death, some obscenities were written on her back door. It was alleged that Demetrius was the one that was responsible for putting those obscenities on the back door.
People in the neighborhood are afraid of Demetrius Moore. Rumors on the street say he is linked to the criminal underworld. His reputation has been a major stumbling block to the investigation.
Demetrius was free and on the street, and which was another thing that hampered some people wanting to cooperate with us.
By pulling the two mugshots, Phil Jordan has confirmed the suspicions of the detectives. Now the psychic has a vision of the actual crime.
Whenever I work a case, I not only try to discover how the person may have died, but I also try to figure out what the injuries were inflicted with. In this case, I felt as though she was stabbed, and I could feel that there'd be a rather long knife that was used.
If one was to read the autopsy report, they'd understand that Mr. Jordan's descriptions were quite correct.
The psychic also claims he can see which of the two suspects actually stabbed Rose.
Phil described to us that the person who did the actual slaying, the actual killing itself, would have a tattoo on their shoulder.
I noticed a marking on his arm that would be a tattoo, and I felt that it had a woman's name in it, but I couldn't make out the woman's name.
I knew that Cuddy had such a tattoo on his left shoulder. Mike was not aware of it. No one else connected with the case was aware of it.
And that he was the perpetrator, the assailant that killed Rose Swartwood.
The tattoo is a stunning revelation, one that Jordan had no way of knowing.
Yeah, he was able to describe Mr. Cuddy as being a vicious person, a person who hated women, had a deep hatred for women.
After 2 frustrating years, Detectives Moosey and Patterson's visit to Phil Jordan re-energizes the case. More than ever, they believe Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are responsible for the death of Rose Swartwood.
We left there with some pretty surprising feelings that he had told us things about Cuddy that probably not a lot of people had known or even investigated.
But now the police must prove that Cuddy and Moore are the killers, and it's not going to be easy.
So we continued to build the case, and we weren't going to jump before we had all the evidence we could collect and all the information that we needed.
A major difficulty has been placing Cuddy and Moore at the crime scene. The detectives revisit the forensic evidence.
There was a sample of blood that was found at the point of entry, which is a rear door, a small broken window.
The drop of blood doesn't match the DNA of either Rose Swartwood or William Cuddy, but trying to match it to Demetrius Moore has stymied the police.
You would have to apply for a court order. And in this case, in order to get a court order, you would at least need enough evidence to substantiate that this person was a viable suspect. Initially, we didn't feel we had enough evidence to do that.
The other piece of forensic evidence comes from the victim's body, bite marks. In the struggle before she died, Rose Swartwood was bitten on the shoulder.
Bite marks are very difficult to identify most of the time, especially when the victim is the receiver of the bite mark.
Though the psychic and the cops both believe William Cuddy stabbed Rose, the investigators don't believe he bit her, and for good reason.
Mr. Cuddy wore dentures, and it was clear that the person who did the biting didn't wear dentures.
If Moore and Cuddy were accomplices in the murder, Moore must be the one who did the biting.
There was actually a photograph taken of Demetrius Moore's teeth on the day of the homicide. When he was being interviewed, the detectives thought enough and were smart enough to take a voluntary picture of his teeth.
Demetrius Moore's teeth may be the key to solving the murder mystery, But he's about to do something no one could ever imagine. For 2 years, detectives Mike Moosey and Corky Patterson have been investigating the murder of elderly widow Rose Swartwood.
This was an absolute senseless crime from the very beginning.
Psychic Phil Jordan has identified the 2 prime suspects, Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy.
At the time of the incident, I believe that I felt one of the perpetrators would be black and one of them would be white.
Detectives have only 2 significant pieces of evidence: a single drop of blood and bite marks found on the victim. Police believe the bite marks belong to Demetrius Moore, but before they can prove it, Moore does something very strange.
The unique thing there was it was found that Demetrius had filed his teeth.
Using a chisel, incredibly, Moore files down his own teeth. What's worse for detectives, they're still unable to obtain a warrant to test Moore's DNA or indeed make a mold of his now damaged teeth. Frustrated, the detectives return to Phil Jordan. What they really want to know is what connects their 2 prime suspects.
There was no information, or anyone had never come forward to put those 2 together at any given time. Again,
the psychic, who has been told nothing about the case, amazes the detectives. He confirms their belief that Cuddy and Moore were together at a party the night Rose was killed.
I felt as I observed the party, it would be a party I would not want to go to because I know I would feel uncomfortable by the character of people that were there. I could see that it was people having a good time, but yet more for the sake of partying to probably drink and get high.
The party is crucial to the investigation. It's the potential link that puts Cuddy and Moore together the night of the murder.
When we learned about the party initially occurring the night of the homicide, it was very difficult for us to get people at the party to remember who came, who left, who was there, who came with who. So locating people that were at the party for additional information on these 2 or anyone else that might have been with them was very difficult for a period of time.
I remember very distinctly seeing the house where I felt that the party had taken place, that there would have to be an enclosed stairwell going up the outside of the house.
He felt that the house was, I believe he said, green in color and had a very distinct outside staircase which led to a 2nd floor, which Sergeant Patterson and I knew to be the location of the party house.
I felt as though they would be first at the party, they would leave the party, commit this heinous act, and then go back to the party, which showed me they probably had little conscience.
Is Jordan's paranormal vision correct? Detectives in Elmira, New York are closer than ever to solving the murder of Rose Swartwood. Armed with a psychic's visions of the crime, they confront reluctant witnesses.
We did have people that came forward, finally, and did remember Cuddy coming with Demetrius Moore. Yes, that link was finally made.
Those witnesses now paint a startling portrait of Moore and Cuddy's behavior the night of the murder.
Demetrius and Cuddy left the party, supposed to go get some beer and money for beer and drugs or whatever. When they returned, Cuddy had a lot of blood on him. Demetrius had a small amount on him, and there was some argument out on the porch, and I believe Demetrius was saying something like, you didn't have to kill her like that.
Once again, Phil Jordan was right. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy were together the night Rose Swartwood was killed. Finally, police have the link that puts their suspects together the night of the crime. They can now get the court order to compare Moore's DNA with that single drop of blood found at the crime scene.
We certainly felt confident that there would be a match, or at least a grouping that was consistent with, which would be sound evidence against him being at the scene of the crime, which he had denied, for years at this point.
Demetrius Moore's DNA matches the blood found on Rose Swartwood's broken window. Moore and Cuddy are charged with the second-degree murder of Rose Swartwood. At the trial, Moore challenges one of the key pieces of evidence against him, that he filed down his teeth.
The most unusual thing I ever saw on a witness stand. His excuse was, when he took the stand, his teeth were chipped up like that because he opened beer bottles with his teeth. And he opened up 2 beer bottles on the stand. His lawyer wanted to show the jury on the stand.
What it didn't do is alter the pattern of his teeth. It certainly altered the ridges of the teeth.
Though they couldn't match the bite marks exactly, it didn't do him any good to file his teeth.
Evidence at the trial showed Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy met at the party house. When they ran out of drugs and alcohol, Moore suggested they rob Rose.
Unfortunately, she had returned home that evening and was found in the apartment. She had apparently been getting ready for bed or just going to bed when the entry was made.
The robbers surprised Rose. There was a struggle. Moore bit the elderly, defenseless victim on the shoulder. Then William Cuddy began to stab her, and he stabbed her over 40 times. After killing Rose Swartwood, Cuddy and Moore dragged her body to her bed, and before leaving, they methodically washed the blood from the floor and the walls, missing just a single drop. Demetrius Moore and William Cuddy are both found guilty, and both men are sentenced to 25 years.
I can't speak for the jury, so I don't know if it had an impact on the jury or on the trial. It had an impact on me that someone could not only brutally murder a 72 or 74-year-old woman this way, but then stay around and clean it up afterwards. They have to have no remorse, no conscience.
Today, the detectives are still amazed at the accuracy of Phil Jordan's visions. The psychic pulled William Cuddy and Demetrius Moore's photo from a stack of mugshots and identified Cuddy as the killer by a tattoo on his shoulder. Phil described the attack as a robbery gone bad and the party house where Cuddy and Moore hatched their plan.
A good psychic can provide you with leads or something, or an avenue to go on when you don't have any.
He's done some pretty amazing things.
They wanted to resolve the case for the family and for Rose, but they also wanted the community to be safe.
In Homestead, Pennsylvania, someone is raping elderly women in the dead of night.
That was a despicable crime.
Certainly a lot of fear.
Police have clues, but no suspects.
Somebody that we knew and that was just getting off, watching us.
Then a psychic has a vision of the attacks.
Horrible violence and screaming.
And the attacker.
This guy was like Spider-Man.
She also makes a chilling prediction.
We were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
Can her mysterious visions help the police to catch a rapist before he becomes a killer? Homestead, Pennsylvania, a small neighborly town on the outskirts of Pittsburgh.
You knew the next door neighbors so well, they were like your own family.
A town built on steel.
Armor for tanks, armor for the ships. We were very much an important part of World War II in Homestead.
But in the mid-1980s, U.S. Steel is leaving Homestead, and with it, 15,000 jobs disappear.
It sort of was like a death blow to Homestead.
And something else is unraveling the fabric of this close-knit community. A rapist is attacking elderly women in their own homes in the dead of night.
It's like somebody raped my mother.
The first assault took place on August 10th, 1983. An 86-year-old woman living alone is attacked and raped in her bedroom. Detective Tom Hobart is the first officer on the scene.
Most people in the town knew each other. If you didn't know them, you knew family members. You knew someone associated with that family. That was a despicable crime. We'd take a lead and we would exhaust that lead. We worked that case for a number of years, and it seemed like at everything we were doing, we were running into dead ends.
No arrest is made and the case goes cold. But 2 years later, a 61-year-old woman is raped in her second-floor bedroom, a carbon copy of the first assault.
I was born and raised in this town. The first two victims I knew personally. Now, these are our folks. These are our people. We knew them. We knew their sons, their daughters.
People tend to forget. They didn't immediately associate the two crimes. We, however, associated immediately just because of the MO, if you will.
Though police know the rapes are connected, they have no suspect.
The victims never saw anything. The victim would awake with him placing something over their face, whether it was a pillow, a blanket, whatever he could. But he always covered their face.
We knew fingerprints matched, but we couldn't match them to anybody at the time. We had serology matches and pubic hair samples.
Forensics evidence told us that he was a black male. We knew he was a rather large man. The victims, when they would describe, they'd actually use their hands and say, you know, I grabbed him and his arms were big.
You take a small area that is saturated with dogs and none of the dogs barked. We knew that this individual responsible lived in the immediate neighborhood.
He was probably a younger man because his method of entering these homes, he had to be strong, he had to be agile. Forensically, we had the evidence from the very beginning. We just didn't have a suspect.
But you got to imagine, other crimes go on. We're a small town, a small department, so we had to pool resources as we need them. We couldn't let the rest of the town suffer because of these incidents.
The rapist leaves clues, but the police still have no suspects, and there is no arrest. Then, 18 months later, a third attack. A 75-year-old widow raped in her second-floor bedroom.
Evidence was pointing to one person that they realized they had a serial rapist on their hands.
The interviewing the women broke your heart. It was very, very embarrassing for them to sit down and talk to me. I was a young man. It just became very personal.
Saving this community was our mission.
The frustration had set in from not being able to find the assailant.
I don't think Hobart went home for a week. I mean, when he did go home, I had to order him home.
With the culprit still at large, Detective Hobart does something unusual. His brother met a psychic at a party and suggests she might be able to help.
He's very skeptical of psychics, and he had went to a party in the Greensburg area, where Nancy's from, and he had met her at the party, and that she was a psychic, and she did a couple neat things that he thought were pretty neat. We chased all our forensic leads down. We hit dead ends with those. When you ask a policeman how to do something, you get a police response. Policemen think the same way. We may as well get someone in from the outside who can give us a new perspective. Whether it was good information or bad information, it was going to be new information. And when he gave me this idea, I thought, why not?
You know, I kind of fluffed it off at first, and then I realized, you know, he's serious. And I said, hey, let's go for it. See what can happen. It certainly couldn't hurt.
Nancy Meyer is a psychic who specializes in what she calls ranging.
What I usually use when I'm working on cases is the environment itself. The whole environment absorbs what happened. It runs as a movie, but I'm in it, and I can pull the information out.
I contact Nancy, and I asked Nancy if she could meet with me, maybe provide me with whatever she could do to help.
Give me a time and I'll be there, because these women who were being assaulted were the age of my own mother.
I had hoped that Nancy would come in and say, here we go, this is the guy you're looking for, let's go knock on his door, and I'd open the door and I'd arrest him and the case would be over. That's not what happened.
But before the psychic gets a chance to meet the detective, there is another rape, just 2 weeks after the third. A 64-year-old woman is viciously assaulted in her second-floor bedroom. But police still have no one in their sights. When they finally meet, Detective Hobart tells the psychic nothing about the case.
I wanted her to be able to come in and tell me something, not me tell her. She did request that her and I walk the general area because she said that she would get a better read, a better vibrations on what she was looking for. I walked several steps behind Nancy and let Nancy lead the way.
As they walk through the 2-block area where all 4 of the rapes occurred, Nancy Meyer appears to tune in on the crimes.
Several times, she stopped right in front of one of the homes and would say, "I'm getting some bad feelings from this house."
The assaults were so bad, it came right through the walls of the house.
Okay. Somehow, Nancy Meyer is able to pinpoint information that only the police knew. Remarkably, she is able to tell the detective in which homes the attacks occurred.
Picking the homes where the assaults took place, it was uncanny. She was saying things that no one told her, but I knew to be fact already.
And now, Nancy claims she can see the actual attacks.
In the images, I saw that he was African American. It was his neighborhood. He knew the streets. He knew how to get from one house to the other. He even recognized the people. And then I'd be looking up at the side of the house, realizing this guy was like Spider-Man. He climbed drain pipes. He went up the sides of houses. He was going in second-story windows. He clearly enjoyed the risk.
As to how that entry was made were very, very accurate, as if she almost knew what had taken place.
He would come in the window, and he would stand for a while looking at his victim sleeping. And it was very clear by the time I got to the 4th property that I was picking up the exact same thought patterns on every single one of those properties. There was no deviation.
But what she tells the detective next is something he didn't know.
It was a street light, and as he turned to look to the street, I got a good visual of his face.
So I asked her, I said, if you could draw, could you draw him? And she said, yeah.
And I said, holy hell, we got the break we've been hunting for.
But is it enough to stop a serial rapist before he strikes again? In Homestead, Pennsylvania, a faceless rapist is targeting elderly women in their homes. Stymied, the police call in a psychic for help.
Whether it was good information or bad information, it was going to be new information.
Who claims to see the attacker's face.
And as he turned, I got a good visual of his face.
Something no one up to now had been able to do.
We got the break we've been hunting for.
Because Nancy's psychic description of the rapist is so specific, Detective Hobart brings in a police sketch artist.
He's got a broad face, the eyes.
Mainly we use composites and sketch artists to eliminate people more so than who it is, it's who it isn't. Most people have seen the overlays that are... We actually had a sketch artist that did the drawings. He changed whatever Nancy was feeling that wasn't right. He changed.
He has this leather hat. Every time I visualize him, he has this hat on.
Normal practice is to remove anything like a hat from the sketch so as to focus on the suspect's features, but producing a police sketch based on the word of a psychic is anything but normal.
I'm off to the side. I have nothing to do with Nancy explaining the sketch artist. I'm just accompanying her. And it's a long day. The hat's not right. You have to move the hat this way. You have to move. I was becoming frustrated, and the sketch artist was becoming frustrated. It's a hat. It's a hat. You know, but no, a hat had to be a certain way.
But we got in an argument over the hat. You don't put a hat on a sketch. This is against protocol. You don't do it. And I said, yes, but if people are to recognize him, the hat has to be on him because he's never without it.
As far as a clue that we were going to go out and everybody had a hat on, and that wasn't the situation. A lot of people wear hats. Nancy explained a black leather cap, and she had it over and over. I felt sorry for the sketch artist, how many times she made him change the hat.
And we told our officers, look, this is not an official wanted poster. This is not something that a victim of a crime has produced. This came from Nancy, a psychic.
And as most people have seen sketch artists, they're never going to be a photograph. But we were still looking at this saying, hey, it's better than what we had.
A very broad nose at the bottom.
But before the psychic sketch is even circulated, the rapist strikes yet again. April 24th, 1987, just 5 weeks after the last attack, a 76-year-old widow is assaulted in her home.
Each one escalated that he became much more aggressive.
The entire town is on edge.
Not panic, but it was certainly a lot of fear.
We had now formed an actual task force where we were on the streets every day.
There were a lot of tired policemen from Allegheny County and the sheriff's departments.
With the attacks intensifying, police ask the psychic for help again, but this time she takes a different approach.
And I said, I think we need to get ahead of this guy and start using my abilities to figure out where he's going to target next. And as we crossed over one street, I could pick up this man walking around late at night, checking out when people's lights were going off. And I noticed that he was on this street quite a bit. And I said to Tommy, this has to be near where he's living, because I keep sensing him.
And what the psychic says next is the last thing that police wanted to hear.
Nancy said, we have to get this guy. We're going to have to get him soon because
we were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
And with the psychic's next revelation, the investigation takes an astonishing turn.
And I felt him checking a house out particularly closely.
And she said, this is not one of your victims, but I'm getting some bad energy coming from this house. Do you know who lives here? There was no indication of the house that who lived there. There was no special signs on the door or anything like that. It looked like any other house in the neighborhood. So when she picked that out, it raised the hair on my neck, because there was no reason for Nancy to be able to pick that particular house out and not knowing anything about the resident of the house. However, I knew that that was a relative of the chief's.
For Police Chief Kelly, the case has just become up close and personal. He takes the psychic's warning seriously and stakes out his grandmother's house.
I got my German Shepherd. Tell him to come on. Bring it on. When you're sitting there in the silence waiting for something brutal to come in, you knew that probably it was going to be a life or death situation. You're aware of every single sound in the night. You can hear your heart pound. Adrenaline takes over. And you're crushed when any of these ladies are victimized the way they were. And it's personal.
But the chief's grandmother isn't the next to fall prey to the rapist. 2 weeks after Nancy's chilling prediction, on a hot June night, an 86-year-old woman living just yards from the chief's grandmother becomes victim number 6.
I was devastated. It was at a lady's house who shared the same alley and the same ethnic last name. In fact, they were related.
It was like, ha ha, I know you're here. I can still do it.
Despite working night and day, police appear no closer to capturing this elusive predator.
Many times, I would get up out of bed, come to Homestead, hide in an alley, sit in a car, sit on the side of the road, hoping that I would see something.
The police were passing out boat horns for the women, 200 of them in fact, so that they could blow a horn and at least have the police come, because they were loud horns. They were advising people to buy dogs.
We were doing everything humanly possible.
The residents were living in a lockdown fear. It wasn't a community that has whole house air conditioning. It was hot. It was summertime. It was blazing hot. They couldn't open a window and put a fan in the window for fear that someone would crawl through that window.
They lived in jail while the perpetrator was probably walking around watching us. And we had to catch this guy.
I was riding up the hill and I saw this elderly lady that I knew carrying some grocery bags up the hill. And I stopped and I says, come on, get in, I'll ride you home. It's just too hot. And you shouldn't be walking in this hot day, you know. It gave her a little bit of hell. And when I dropped her off at her house, I personally had said to her, check your windows and just be careful. And she says, okay, you know. I just walked into the station and Chief Kelly said, we had another rape yesterday. And I said, oh man, like who was it? And he mentioned the name, and it was the lady that I had taken up the hill.
Despite the mayor's warning, on August 25th, the 76-year-old lady became the 7th victim. It was 2 months after the 6th attack, but this time the violence has escalated to a dangerous level. Fear has gripped Homestead, Pennsylvania. A serial rapist is preying on elderly women, and police seem powerless to stop him.
These are our people. We knew them.
Chased all our forensic leads down. We hit dead ends with those. The frustration that set in.
Psychic Nancy Meyer is helping with the investigation. She's certain, if not caught soon, the rapist will turn killer.
We were going to have a murder rather than a vicious assault.
At the scene of the last rape, they had found a large knife on the steps of her home that he had threatened to cut her throat if she didn't stop fighting.
We were convinced 100% that we were dealing with somebody that we knew and that was just getting off, watching us.
But it was, again, looking for that proverbial needle in a haystack. He wasn't going to appear to be public enemy number one. He was going to appear to be a nice young man.
With the investigation hitting a wall, Detective Hobart again contacts the psychic.
After the last victim, Nancy and I spoke again. I was eating, sleeping, and drinking this case, along with other officers. I wasn't the only officer doing that. I'm sure that my frustrations of being unable to locate this guy were starting to show.
And I said, Tommy, you're going to have him by next week. It's going to be over with. You're going to arrest him. You won't need me anymore. I'll believe that when I see it. But he said, gee, I hope you're right. I said, I hope I'm right. I hope this nightmare's over with.
And then, the break the entire town has been waiting for.
None of our victims had anything ever taken from them until our last victim.
One of those items was a shotgun.
Phone rang, 3 o'clock in the morning. It was a guy I know, and he said, I know who you're hunting for. I said, come on. They took a shotgun last night, didn't they? We never publicized that. Never. And he said, it's over Steel City Arms over in Braddock. The guy's trying to sell it. I can set it up for you.
The informant sets up the buy, and the police, armed with the psychic's sketch, stake out the pawn shop and wait. When the suspect arrives and takes back possession of the gun, the police are there to arrest him.
And I had the sketch sitting next to me on the seat. And he turned and kind of looked at me. I said, this was like a photograph of this guy. And, of course, at the time, my belief in the psychics went sky high.
When he did return and when he did take back custody of the shotgun, they were there to arrest him on a charge of receiving stolen property. And to this point, they didn't have his fingerprints.
We brought him into the police department, Mirandized him, his rights, rolled his fingerprints. We had a district attorney there advising us to make sure that every move we made was calculated, that there's not going to be any mistakes. This man is going to go to trial. There's not going to be any motions to suppress. There's not going to be any technicalities to walk on.
We called a fingerprint expert. When he prepared the prints, he just looked up and said, gentlemen, it's over.
You would have thought everybody in the room would have been high-fiving or yelling or screaming. Wasn't a sound in the room.
Matched the fingerprints, and all the forensic evidence on down the line matched.
After 4 years and 7 vicious attacks, the man arrested is 22-year-old Dennis Foy. Unemployed, Foy lived with his parents on the same block where one of the rapes occurred.
Foy's arrest in the fall of 1987 came after his case received not only local but national publicity.
I think my feeling is for the victims, and they're through it, and so am I.
Thank God that these women that were raped were heroes enough to go to court.
You saw 3 widows and a woman who had never married, who had told police she in fact had been a virgin, a 76-year-old woman, had to testify in detail.
A year later at his trial, Foy faced the women he violated. In court, the jury hear the intimate details of Foy's trail of terror. He knew his victims and staked out their homes, waiting for his chance. He broke in by scaling the side of a house and entering through a second-floor window. Inside, he attacked the defenseless women and stifled their cries for help with a pillow or whatever else was nearby. Sometimes he tied their feet and hands. He threatened his final victim with a knife. The judge described his acts as unspeakable. Foy is convicted on all counts and receives 100 years in maximum security prison. With no inside knowledge, how could psychic Nancy Meyer have known so much about this case? She knew the attacker was African American, lived in the neighborhood, and knew his victims. Through her psychic ranging, she described how he entered each home through the second-story window, and she correctly predicted when the investigation would be over. And what about that hat? When Dennis Foy was arrested, he wore a hat eerily similar to the one Nancy had the sketch artist draw.
If you're gonna put a hat on somebody, you put a hat on, whatever. But she wanted it tilted a certain way. She wanted it to be, to cover a certain part, you know, the head. The things that amazed me is she hit so many things right. And the last thing was the hat. She just hit, the hat was just, it was there. It was the way she described it and painstakingly described it.
Today, Homestead, Pennsylvania is bouncing back from economic downturn.
We haven't bounced back to where we should be, but we had a developer that bought the U.S. Steel property. Right now it's called the Waterfront.
But no one can forget those 5 years when one man held an entire community hostage.
You know, these acts affect a lot of people. Thank goodness they caught him. Who knows what the next step might have been.
You'll never lose that feeling, you know. You'll never lose the feeling that you could have done more for these people.
Just to do it for fun, I don't think so. It's not fun ranging assaults like that. There's nothing fun about it. But when it gets results, then it's worth it.
She said we would have them, and it wasn't shortly thereafter that we did. So, you explain it.
The summer of '79, and someone is sexually assaulting young women in a Virginia college town.
We concluded that we had a serial rapist. People were scared to death.
Investigators have little to go on.
We were desperate. We wanted any help we could get.
Under the gun to solve the case, the police turn to a psychic.
This rapist is apologizing to me.
There's obviously some powers at work there.
Oh my gosh, well, what are we into?
Will the psychic help the police to stop a serial rapist before he becomes a serial murderer? Stanton, Virginia, a small, sleepy southern town nestled in the Shenandoah Valley, the birthplace of Woodrow Wilson, the 28th President of the United States.
It was a city of 25,000, but it was sort of caught in time.
But on the evening of March 14th, 1979, Stanton's peace is shattered. A knife-wielding rapist attacks a 22-year-old student in her room at the local college. It is the first in what would be a string of violent sexual assaults.
Stanton Police Department. I just remember getting the call, and the lady was very hysterical and upset, which, of course, anyone would have been going through that. I just remember how I felt so scared and helpless. My main thing was to try to keep her calm until a police officer could arrive.
Detective Ronnie Wiseman is put on the case.
Our first rape was very unusual because we had very few rapes at all. And this one seemed to be rape from a stranger.
All police have to go on is a composite drawing of the assailant based on the victim's vague description. Then, 2.5 months later, a second rape, only blocks away from the college. Again, few clues for the police.
A person came in a window on each one. He used a knife, and he had a stocking mask on. And so our best description was height and weight, race. That's about it.
Both victims described their attacker as a large African American. But because of the mask, they can't see his features, and he leaves few clues. Ray Robertson is the prosecutor for the city of Stanton.
Back in 1979, we didn't have DNA evidence. Any foreign hairs, any semen, any saliva, anything like that we found on them, we could get the DNA on that now. We couldn't do that back in 1979, and so it's a very different game when it comes to solving crimes now from what it was back then.
We just had no evidence.
With a violent rapist on the loose, the whole town is on edge.
For something like that to happen around here was a really big deal. That kind of stuff just didn't happen in Stanton. It made me be much more aware. Any place I went, I was always checking, being more cautious.
During that particular time, women were kind of afraid to walk streets at night alone, especially in the college area. All the windows were down and locked.
In a town where serious crime is all but unheard of, the pressure on local police for results is immense.
The community was actually in pretty much of an uproar.
I was following the news in the newspaper daily, especially on this case, because there was so much turmoil. I would say, wow, I don't envy the police officers that's working this case, because it's got to be tough.
Everyone that you would come in contact with, regardless of what you were doing, wanted to know how the case was going.
Then, driving by a construction site, the victim of one of the rapes spots the man she thinks attacked her.
One of the victims said, that's him. That's him. There's no question about it.
Police arrest the man, but they soon realize the case against him is flimsy.
The guy wore a stocking mask. How can you make an identification of a suspect that has a stocking mask on?
I think everyone knew that it was not right.
He had been convicted of minor offenses that were very different from the type of offenses that a rapist usually commits, and I really didn't think he had done it.
No sooner is the first suspect released than the other rape victim names a different man. A man she vaguely knows, and he too is arrested.
He actually flunked a polygraph test, so on the basis of the victim identification and the polygraph results, he was arrested.
Everyone seemed to say, oh boy, we got the guy. We can relax a little bit.
But the police don't relax for long. Less than a month later, a third attack, just like the first two. Wearing a stocking mask and wielding a knife, a man climbs through a window and rapes a 32-year-old woman. All this while the investigators' prime suspect is behind bars.
The second person that was arrested was in jail when the third incident happened. Really didn't think we had two people doing acts.
The suspect is released.
It's very sad. The police were scrambling to get an arrest in the case.
Women were on edge, and we were getting a little frustrated and maybe a little antsy, too, to solve some of these things.
With 3 identical attacks, police believe, unless stopped, the man will almost certainly rape again.
We realized after about 2 or 3, we had a serial rapist. This is something that was very new. We'd never had anything like this.
Under intense pressure, Detective Wiseman calls in Special Agent Darrell Stillwell of the State Police.
You had a person that was operating within about a 5-block area. There were all types of sightings, window peepings, entries into houses, burglaries, thefts of small items.
The perpetrator's rapid escalation from petty burglary to violent rape makes police fear what he'll do next.
The possibility that something will go down, a resistance that will cause a homicide. There's always the possibility of that.
Then, 6 months after the rapes began, a chance event changes the whole course of the investigation. Psychic Noreen Rainier arrives in town to give a talk at the local college about ESP and the paranormal.
I had been teaching at Blue Ridge Community College, and at the very end of my lecture, a young lady stood up in the audience and asked me if I would do a public service. I said yes, and she told me that there had been a rapist in the town, and her sister had been one of the victims, and if I could hold her ring and see if I picked up anything.
Noreen uses psychometry, a common psychic technique.
It seems that object has memory or goes beyond memory, and I can see images in my head.
Noreen holds the victim's ring while the student records her response.
And I remember holding it and picking up several pieces of information that came into my mind. She had a tape recorder and was taping it.
Despite knowing nothing about the case, Noreen immediately connects with the horror that is gripping the town.
I felt this small, peaceful, beautiful community was terrorized, certainly the women, because of this rapist attacking again and again.
Noreen also claims to see details of the actual crime.
I remember seeing a stalking mask over.
Desperate to see her sister's attacker brought to justice, the student takes the tape recording of the psychic to the police.
Stalking mask.
The cops are doubtful at first, but agree to listen to the tape. Like the student, they are impressed with what Noreen has to say.
Noreen told us this guy had used a stocking mask and a knife in all his rapes. All the things that the victim had told us that never were reported in the media.
Well, we were sort of in disbelief. How does she know this? Because these things weren't out.
On September 2nd, a fourth woman is raped. The victim, a young woman who was babysitting for friends. And then, a few weeks later, the rapist, wearing his trademark stocking mask, strikes again, this time a 23-year-old woman.
The public image of the Stanton Police Department plummeted. It was a worst-case scenario.
With the attacks becoming more frequent and more brazen, the cops are willing to try anything, even a psychic.
We were desperate. We wanted any help we could get.
Dabbling in the paranormal to solve a crime is not conventional police procedure.
We had no idea what we were getting into, and it was very new.
I think that when the police first agreed to work with me, they had no clues, and he kept raping, and they had no information, so they thought, what do we have to lose?
Can a psychic working with detectives help to track down a sexual predator before serial rape turns to murder?
And we looked at each other and thought, oh my gosh, well, what are we into?
In the summer of 1979, a violent sexual predator is haunting Stanton, Virginia.
We concluded that we had a serial rapist.
5 violent rapes have been committed by a mysterious masked man carrying a knife. With few leads, the police have all but hit a wall.
The public image of the Stanton Police Department plummeted. It was a worst-case scenario.
In desperation, the detectives turn to psychic Noreen Renier, who has offered to help.
I was just nervous. I had never worked for the police before.
Today, Noreen Renier is one of America's best-known psychics. But before Stanton, she had never worked with the police.
So my own concern was, will my mind be able to do what they want?
The first thing investigators do is take Noreen to the home of the third victim, the sister of the student Noreen had met.
We just let her go, didn't say a word like, yeah, you're right, or no, you're wrong, or anything.
We didn't chat, we just went, hello, hello, and I started working.
We took Noreen to this house. About halfway up the steps, she said he came in that window right there.
The rapist had climbed into the window and had touched the banister.
Noreen's vision uncannily matches what the investigators already believe.
We found a ladder laying in the yard, and we came to determine that the person went in a upstairs side window. These things had never gotten out.
How could the psychic know something that hadn't been released to the public and the media?
When he opened the window, in order to get in, he just had to sort of jump to the banister.
That banister had given police the one hard piece of physical evidence they have.
They'd gotten a real good palm print where he had to grab the banister.
Walking through the home, Noreen's paranormal visions of the attack come thick and fast.
He was already waiting for her when she got home. They said, show us.
She pointed to a room and said he was waiting back in that room for the victim to come home. That was true also. Before she got to the bedroom, she said, there's some violent activity up here.
They looked at each other, but they didn't say anything. And then we walked in.
She walked in the bedroom and sat down on the bed, and she started talking as if she were the victim.
Noreen's description of the attack matches every detail of the victim's report. The rapist had come in the window. He had been hiding in wait. He had attacked her in her bedroom. Now, eerily, Noreen claims she has taken on the role of the victim and reveals something startling about the rapist.
He's apologizing to me. And I was so shocked. But it just was like a little scene from a movie, just that one quick little picture, and I could hear his words. I'm sorry.
This bizarre detail that the rapist apologizes to his victims is already known to the investigators. She was in a car accident.
He spoke to each victim, carried on very apologetic conversations.
And he apologized to some of the victims. It was very, very unusual.
But the psychic claims to have one more detail about the rapist.
I feel like his pants and shirt, they match. He's wearing a uniform. I could feel the material, and uniforms have a special heaviness to it. And I could tell that the pants and the shirt matched.
We were in disbelief. How does she know this? Because these things weren't out.
Noreen's first vision of the rapist suggests he's a laborer. But as she talks, she's also receiving other more cryptic psychic signals.
What I'm seeing, it seems to be going around and around.
The entire time, she would sit and talk, and she was drawing on the pad with a pencil, just drawing a perfect circle.
Noreen is sure the circles she's drawing mean something, but exactly what she can't say.
I remember first seeing him driving something. I remember knowing that whatever he drove went around and around.
She said, I have no idea what this means, but it has something to do with his occupation.
Without knowing anything, the psychic has accurately described the attacks and given the investigators a profile of the serial rapist.
There's obviously some powers at work there. It must be. And I've pretty much concluded that in my mind based upon this particular case.
Impressed with what they've learned so far, the detectives take Noreen to the home of the most recent victim.
They never told me any information, never gave me any feedback. Taking me to a second victim's house, I knew that I must be onto something.
There, she has a vision that would provide police with a vital clue. She claims to see where the rapist lives.
See this theater marquade, and I knew he lived real close. I remember feeling the brick.
Which was very interesting because there was an old theater right in the vicinity where all this was occurring. Most of these things occurred within a mile and a half, or just within 5 blocks.
Noreen has told the cops where she believes the rapist lives, but she also knows how he can be identified.
I wanted to go through his body to see if I could pick up any tattoos or scars. When I got to the knee, I could see the scar. First of all, it hurt. I remember the limping.
Pretty deep scar on his leg that would cause him a slight limp. Very new to us. We had no idea. She was getting a pretty detailed picture of this attack.
Can the psychic's cryptic clues help the police to track down a rapist who's already attacked 5 women?
And we had the information, but we didn't know what to do with it.
In the summer of 1979, a serial rapist is terrorizing the college town of Stanton, Virginia.
The police were scrambling to get an arrest in the case. There was a crisis of public confidence.
Desperate, the investigators have enlisted a psychic.
She said she was picking up energy, and she was taking on the role of this victim.
I feel theater. I knew he lived real close, and I remember feeling the brick.
She said he lived in an apartment right across from a movie theater. Brick apartment, she even stated. We did concentrate on the brick apartment building across from the movie theater.
We were in plane cars, and we had them positioned all around the city, and especially in that particular area.
The community became absolutely racked with fear. There was a tremendous need to get this case solved.
And it could have gone real bad for us.
Armed with details provided by Noreen's extraordinary psychic visions, police stake out the movie house and other key locations in Stanton and lie in wait.
We spent many sleepless nights on this case.
We would stake out till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, then come back out about 7.
Then, after 2 weeks of around-the-clock surveillance, on the evening of December 27th, a break.
Stanton Police Department.
A call came in that someone was peeking in the window.
The call comes from a woman living less than a block away from the movie house.
Ma'am, is the suspect still there? I understand, and I'll get an officer on...
We had one of our cars sitting right near the end of that driveway.
Got a report of a person messing around the house, looking in the windows and this, that, and the other. And when he came out of the yard, it was a fenced yard he had to walk out of. When he came out of the yard, we stopped him and questioned him about his business in the area.
And something else.
He had a limp.
Could this limp be linked to the scar the psychic predicted the rapist would have on his knee?
Could you hold up for a minute?
Wasn't his home. We didn't know anyone in the home. Told us he was looking for some boxes because he was moving. He told us, start telling us a number of things that just didn't make any sense.
Got any weapons on you? Anything on you?
I think we all looked at him and said, I think we have the right guy here. I don't think there was any question.
Have the police got the right man? He does live by the theater.
From around here? Yeah. Watch your head.
The Peeping Tom is taken into custody without a struggle. That man is 22-year-old James Bruce Robinson of Stanton. Police charge him with attempted burglary. But is he the man responsible for raping 5 women?
We knew we had him pretty well there for an attempted B&E, but at that point we had no idea that he was the rapist.
We did get his fingerprints, and I'd gotten a good palm print, so I took his palm prints, and we took those to the lab the next day.
Then they remember one of Noreen's most detailed predictions. The rapist would have a big scar on his knee.
It's very strange to ask him to pull his pant legs up. He had no idea why we asked him that. I was so excited when he pulled his pant leg up and showed me a great big scar there. So all of these things just started coming together.
The psychic is right. But to nail Robinson, they need more. They need hard evidence.
The evidence that we had was pretty, shall I say, skimpy on each one of these sexual assaults as far as linking anything particularly to him. We had one palm print off of one of the scenes.
The investigators devise a plan to persuade Robinson to confess. They take him to the scene of his crimes.
It was a technique I used in many criminal investigations. Put him in a car and drive him to a neighborhood.
We did a lot of running around in the car with him, asking him things as we drove by people's houses that he had visited. And
he started out making confessions to trespasses and burglaries. That's how it started.
Despite admitting to a string of burglaries, Robinson denies rape. But then, suddenly...
Sir, the lab just called back. Your palm print matches your suspect.
We got a call over the radio that the lab had called and matched that palm print. He knew exactly now that he's had it.
Confronted with the evidence, James Robinson breaks down and confesses to the rapes.
He gave the police details that only the true rapist could have known.
There's little doubt that Noreen helped police put the serial rapist behind bars. Her remarkable insights were right on almost every count. She described how the perpetrator had entered the homes, how he had apologized to his victims. She told police the suspect lived close to a theater, that he limped, and he had a scar on his knee.
This is Dixie movie theater. It's been here for years. And Coincidentally, right across the street are the Woodward Apartments, and where the suspect was found to live.
And what about those puzzling circles Noreen drew?
The suspect drove a cement mixer truck. He would leave the truck parked in front of the apartment or somewhere close, and he'd go in.
I must admit I was very impressed by he drives something that goes round and round, and it turned out to be a cement mixer truck. That was pretty cool.
Noreen's vision of a man in uniform is also true.
The night we picked him up, he had the shirt on.
At the trial, the prosecution paint a chilling portrait of a man driven to rape and rape again. James Bruce Robinson pleads guilty and is sentenced to 5 concurrent 20-year sentences for the Stanton rapes.
We were very impressed with Noreen and the information that she was able to give us.
It gives you a little extra something to look for, you know, when you're out on the street.
Everything that she gave came about.
And then at the very end, when I left, as they were shaking my hands, they said, "When will we catch him?" And I thought for a second, and I said, "Before Christmas."
And we got him on December 22nd.
Called me later to thank me for my Christmas present.
A lazy summer day at the lake turns to panic.
I said, "Where's Tom?"
When a 5-year-old boy disappears.
I wondered if he was dead.
Police think he's drowned, but a local psychic says he's lost in the forest.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree.
Is the psychic right? Is Tommy Kennedy alive or dead? Empire Lake in picturesque upstate New York, a favorite spot to spend a summer afternoon, especially in the mid-70s.
It was a place where people could go and relax, or bring their picnic lunches and have a nice time.
But for Mary Kennedy, Empire Lake brings back memories of a day she will never forget. On a hot summer day in 1975, Mary Kennedy and her family head to Empire Lake to spend the day swimming.
My fiancé and his 2 daughters, Siri and Lisa, and my 2 sons, Ben and Tom, we decided to go down to the lake and give the children a chance to cool off.
After swimming, Fred takes the kids for a nature walk.
It was all 4 of the children. I really don't remember why I didn't go.
Fred and the kids disappear into the woods.
While everyone was hiking, I was lying on the blanket, enjoying the day. Knowing me, I probably had a book with me.
But that enjoyment was about to end.
I see Fred and the children coming towards me. Everybody was sweaty and happy, and I don't see Tom.
Tommy is Mary's youngest son. He's 5 years old.
I felt a moment of panic. Fred comes up to me and I say, "Where's Tom?" And Fred says, "I sent him back to you."
Fred says Tom wasn't wearing shoes, and he complained his feet were hurting.
I sent him back to you just at the beginning of our trip. He was whiny and didn't seem to want to do the walk, and so I sent him back to you. he thought that Tom was more competent than he was. I would not have done that. Oh my God. Where's my child?
Mom! Help me!
I remember just jumping up and starting to run around the lake, screaming for him.
They search frantically, backtracking their walk. Perhaps he's just hiding.
He was like a little imp, liked to play tricks on people. They were always busy doing something, building tree houses, exploring the fields. He was delightful.
But after 2 hours, no sign of Tommy. To add to their concern, a thunderstorm is moving in. They realize it's time to call the police.
By the time I arrived, Tommy had probably been missing 2 or 3 hours. It was probably somewhere around 4 or 5 o'clock by that time.
Dave Redsiger was a member of the local emergency squad in Spencer.
What we did was contacted all the surrounding fire departments.
I remember standing there and seeing the emergency vehicles beginning to arrive right down on the lawn. You know, they just bypassed the parking lot and they were setting up a command center down there on the lawn. It seemed like every car had a two-way radio going.
He's wearing a white t-shirt and a pair of plaid shorts.
I remember just regular people beginning to arrive. People standing in groups and being briefed and being told where to go.
Nobody seemed to see him around the campsite. Nobody's seen him around the swim area. So you've kind of narrowed it down to 2 areas, the woods or the lake.
I look over and they're bringing boats in. And that only means one thing.
A dive team goes into the water to search for Tommy.
Near the camping area was heavily dead woods, a lot of stumps, things that, you know, if somebody got in there, they could very easily get entangled underneath the water and not be able to get back to the surface.
And I was just horrified. I was absolutely horrified. And I just wouldn't look at them. Absolutely didn't want to look at them.
The dive team searches the perimeter of the lake, but no sign of Tommy. The storm is getting worse.
Once the weather started to get bad and the lightning started getting pretty nasty, we had to call off the water search.
4 hours had passed since 5-year-old Tom went missing.
And by that time, it was pouring. It was just torrential. And I'm thinking about this little 5-year-old kid with a bathing suit on, out there in the cold rain, in the woods somewhere. And I'm just so scared for him.
8 miles away, in the town of Spencer, 25-year-old psychic Phil Jordan hears the news.
I ran across the backyard, and my landlord was standing in the back door, and she said a little boy was missing up at Empire Lake. She says they think he's in the lake and that he is drowned.
But out of nowhere, the psychic has a vision. He can see little Tommy.
I could see this little boy lying under a very large tree. That showed me that he was probably in the woods and probably not in the lake.
Is Tommy Kennedy still alive, lost in the woods? Is the psychic right? And will anyone listen? In upstate New York, a massive search is underway at Empire Lake for 5-year-old Tommy Kennedy, who vanished during a family picnic.
This little 5-year-old kid.
Tommy!
out there in the cold rain, and I'm just so scared for him.
The storm gets worse and day turns to night.
We really started getting some nasty storm weather coming in, and it blew in quite heavy. A lot of rain. And of course with that we got a lot of thunder and lightning, and it got quite cold.
The missing boy's father, Don Kennedy, a local reporter, arrives 8 hours after his son disappeared.
He had been out of town, and he had rushed to the lake.
Don begins frantically searching for his son, but now there's a new danger.
With the lightning and the thunder, we were really afraid of ending up with, more searchers lost besides the boy.
Redsicker has no choice. He calls off the search.
Intellectually I understood, but my little 5-year-old is out there still by himself.
Tommy's parents are desperate. Don Kennedy remembers a piece he'd written about a local psychic. By coincidence, it's Phil Jordan.
My 5-year-old child was lost. As far as I was concerned, bring in the National Guard. Bring in anyone who will help search for him and find him.
I was not surprised that he called me. I felt that I might hear from some of the family. He was really pleading. He wanted me to come up to the lake at that time.
The psychic says he can help to find the missing boy, but not just yet.
I just knew that if I went there, I would become contaminated with everyone else's ideas and not follow my own self, my own psychic self. I remember saying to Don Kennedy, I'm really sorry, but I just can't come right now. I have to wait till daylight because I don't want to miss a clue that could help us to find him.
With the search called off, and the psychic refusing to come to the lake until daybreak, Mary Kennedy is losing hope.
I'm wondering if he's cold, wondering if he's scared. I wondered if he was dead.
But back in Spencer, psychic Phil Jordan is already on the case.
I sometimes leaf through the Bible and just point to something. And there was a phrase, and it said something about the children going into the woods.
Suddenly, the psychic has a vision of exactly where to find Tommy. Although he's never been to Empire Lake, he begins to draw a map.
The first thing I knew was that down to my left, there would be 3 boats. And then I could see the building across the lake. And I knew I would have to go into the woods behind the building till we find a clearing. So I drew that all on the map.
But can this crudely drawn map lead to Tommy Kennedy? It's 5 a.m. The storm is over. Tommy Kennedy has been missing an agonizing 16 hours.
No parent should have to spend a night like that. I don't remember whether we ate supper, what we said to each other. It's blank.
Hundreds of volunteers from miles around gather at dawn to resume the search.
There were several fire trucks with personnel on them, at least 1 ambulance. We got the people together, told them what the boy's name was, and then had them search areas around the lake into the wooded areas, but we concentrated on the area immediately around the camping area and the bathing, swimming area.
I was just tremendously grateful that all these people just showed up.
Psychic Phil Jordan also arrives at the lake to help with the search.
I met Dave Redsicker, who was a friend of mine, but was the investigator in charge. Even I says, well, I have this map.
I was shocked. As simple as the map was, the things that he had drawn on the map were right there.
The 3 boats were there, exactly as I had drawn. And across, you could see a large tent. And I said, that has to be the building. We'll go in behind the tent.
But the searchers think he's wrong.
What he was describing was an area that we hadn't searched yet, because it was an area that we figured was the most remote area, or most unlikely area that this child would have gotten into.
But the psychic is confident his map will lead to the lost boy. Before he begins his search, the psychic makes an unusual request.
He asked me for an article of clothing that belonged to Tom. So I asked Phil Jordan if one of his little sneakers would be okay, and Phil said absolutely.
His mom made sure I had that sneaker, and I tucked that into my belt, and I focused on Tommy Kennedy and finding him.
250 rescuers searched the south side of Empire Lake, the area closest to the spot where Tommy was last seen. Meanwhile, Phil Jordan and 2 volunteers, armed only with a psychic map and a little boy's shoe, head in the opposite direction.
There was myself and these 2 men that I didn't know.
I just wished them good luck, and they headed out into the woods.
25-year-old Phil Jordan has never tested his psychic powers in a life-and-death situation before, and he's never been to Empire Lake. But he has faith in his map.
I know we're going to find him, and we will find him within an hour. Tommy! Every little ways I would stop, and I'd say to myself, okay, we have to keep going straight. Now we have to turn left. Tommy! Now we have to go up here. We have to go a little bit to the right. And I remember talking to myself through the whole thing so I could block out any of the ideas that others had. It was rugged terrain. There was a hiking path, but it was uphill. A lot of woods, a lot of trees falling across the path, and treacherous going.
Is it possible that a 5-year-old without shoes could have strayed so far? The psychic is now deep in the woods, 2 miles from where Tommy Kennedy disappeared. And so far, the psychic has turned up nothing. And now, one of the 2 men with him is starting to have doubts.
One of them kept saying, everything you're describing is in another direction.
Yet hundreds of volunteers searching in the area where he should be can't find a trace of Tommy either.
Nothing. It was as if Tom had just vanished.
The psychic struggles to keep his vision.
And that's when I would refer to the map and hold on to his sneaker and say, Tommy, I'm coming. I'm going to find you.
But now even the psychic starts to doubt his map.
I was all ready to say, well, maybe we should check that other area and come back here later today.
And then Phil Jordan makes a startling discovery. On the shores of Empire Lake in upstate New York, Mary Kennedy waits desperately for any news of her 5-year-old son, Tommy, who's been missing for over 16 hours.
It was as if Tom had just vanished.
Hundreds of searchers comb the area around the lake where the boy disappeared, but with no luck. Yet 2 miles away, psychic Phil Jordan, following his crude map, has stumbled across a child's footprint.
It was right in front of me. I looked at that footprint and I thought, oh, we must be close, and I got goosebumps, you know.
That footprint convinces the psychic he's on the right track.
I said to the other searchers, now we have to find a clearing. It shouldn't be too far up here. So we continued on, and within moments we found the clearing. I just stood at the opening of the clearing and said to myself, okay, now which way do I have to go? I looked at it sort of as a clock, and I thought, we've got to go where the 11 is. And we went to that area, and there was another path through the woods.
As he climbs a gully, Phil falls behind the other searchers, but he can still hear them calling out Tommy's name. And then, an answer.
Help me! I'm over here!
I woke up to the sound of people calling my name. I started screaming, I'm over here, I'm over here.
The fellow who tried to talk me into going in the other direction, He says, I hear him yelling. He's yelling for help. And so they all ran in the direction that the voice came from.
I saw these men coming towards me with huge smiles on their face. I was very relieved that they had found me. Everybody was giving Phil Jordan congratulations. I could tell right away that he was the one that was responsible for locating me.
I just dropped there and knelt there and thanked God that he had given me this ability and cried. You know, I just sobbed. It was very emotional. He was worried that he had done wrong. He was worried that he was going to be reprimanded. And it was quite the opposite. Everybody was so thankful.
Tommy Kennedy had been missing more than 16 hours. One of the searchers reminds Phil about a prediction he had made.
He says, 58 minutes. And I says, what does that mean? And he says, you told me we'd find him within an hour, and it was 58 minutes after we started.
Tommy's rescuers carry him out to a nearby road.
They had walkie-talkies, and they radioed for help, and soon the ambulance came to a road that was not far from where Tommy actually was.
And the news that Tommy is safe is radioed back to the lake.
Someone comes up to me and tells me that Tom has been found. It's like heaven opened up. I was just so grateful. Then almost instantly, there he is.
After almost 2 days of anguish, mother and son are reunited.
He says, I was camping, Mom. I slept next to a stick. It's a miracle. It's a miracle that he's found, and it's a miracle that he's okay.
Phil Jordan's visions had been right from the beginning. Tommy Kennedy hadn't gone near the lake. Instead, he had wandered deep into the forest.
I immediately started crying and whining as I was walking back, and I'm sure that contributed to me getting lost. I probably wasn't paying attention to the marks on the path. I just started running in circles, and within a very short period of time, the clouds rolled in. And that first lightning bolt came down. Then I was terrified, and I started running and running and running.
Wet, scared, and exhausted, he remembered what his mother had taught him.
I taught my children standard safety, which is you don't go near the water when there's lightning. Find a sheltered place.
I came upon a sort of a clearing, and I found a nice large stick to fend off any attacking animals.
Phil had marked just such a clearing on his map.
I was completely exhausted by that time, so I didn't have any trouble at all falling asleep.
How could a psychic with a crudely drawn map succeed where 250 rescuers failed?
If it hadn't been for Phil, and his map and his abilities, we either wouldn't have found him for a long time or we may not have found him at all.
I'm certain that Phil Jordan saved Tom's life.
Word that Phil Jordan had found a lost boy using his psychic abilities is big news. Even the local sheriff, who is not in the habit of using the paranormal, recognizes his achievement.
And he says, I would like you to become deputized so that if we have other cases, you can work more freely with law enforcement.
So help me God.
At that time, Phil was the only deputized psychic that I was aware of in New York State.
Phil Jordan's amazing accomplishment at Empire Lake paved the way for psychics all over America to team up with police in solving difficult cases.
It was truly an honor to be deputized because at that time in history, psychics were just beginning to be used a little bit in police work.
It's now 32 years since psychic Phil Jordan found little Tommy Kennedy lost in the woods. They haven't seen each other since. Until today.
Good to see you. Well,
Phil still has the shoe that helped him to find Tommy so long ago.
I put it in my belt, and I'd say, okay, Tommy, tell me where you are. Do you remember that day?
I do. I remember running through the woods, I remember the lightning. I remember finding a stick to sleep with.
Seeing
I remember.
the wild bear.
Exactly. Yeah, like my 5-year-old with a stick is going to do something to a bear.
That's right.
But
well, you were using your head.
Yeah.
That's the best way you knew how.
Right. Yeah. And the next thing I remember is hearing you guys. You know, I heard you calling for me and waking up.
It was that day that I proved my ability to myself. And from then on, no one's ever convinced me that I can't do what I do.
Without him, they might have been looking for my bones, you know?
When a 42-year-old nurse is found bludgeoned to death, a small town in New Jersey is in shock.
It was a vicious attack.
Her hands were bound with an extension cord.
A minimum of 21 hits in the head.
I didn't have my mother to raise me anymore.
Police suspect her boyfriend, but a psychic says the killer is someone else.
I saw a man, saw a hammer, a tied-up woman in her bed.
Can a psychic's vision solve the mystery of who killed Betty Cornish?
The killer lives upstairs.
Belvedere, New Jersey, an hour away from New York City, but a million miles away from big city crime. A town where neighbors trust each other and doors are seldom locked.
It's a very quiet town. Everybody knows everyone. It's just one of those small communities.
Basically a little rural town that hadn't really changed over the decades.
Until August 8th, 1987. A frantic emergency call comes in from a man who says he's found his girlfriend dead. Kent Swigert, now chief of Belvedere Police, is the first on the scene.
I entered the apartment and observed a male standing in the living room. And this male said to me, "Is she dead?" So I walked into the bedroom and I observed a female lying face up in the bed. It was pretty obvious that she was killed.
The crime is so horrific that the Belvedere Police need help. Dave Heater of the Warren County Prosecutor's Office is assigned to the case.
It was a vicious attack. We had a minimum of 21 hits in the head. There was blood spattered 360 degrees on all four walls, the ceiling. There was blood pooled on the floor.
She was laying face up, her arms were behind her back, her hands were bound with an extension cord.
Her nightshirt was pulled up over her head.
Totally blood-soaked, along with the sheet around about her head that was also blood-soaked.
There was exposed bone, and extreme damage to the forehead.
The victim is 42-year-old Betty Cornish, a divorced mother with 5 grown daughters. She worked as a practical nurse.
She was a good mom. She liked to go out dancing, and she had a big circle of friends that she would go out with.
She had recently moved back to Belvedere to be closer to her family.
It was something I just couldn't believe. I was like, what do you mean, you know? What do you mean my sister's dead?
So vicious was the attack that at first police think she was killed by gunfire.
My sister Mary Beth called. She just said something happened and that they thought she was shot.
And I know I started going crazy that I wanted to go with her because I knew they were going to take her body to Newark for an autopsy. And I just kept saying, she's going to be alone, she's going to be alone, I want to be with her.
The autopsy report shows that Betty Cornish died of blunt force injuries consistent with a hammer attack.
When we started to find out from the autopsy reports that the claw end of the hammer was used and that it penetrated into the skull, it was gruesome.
This was an angry person. Whether it came as a result of a fight, whether the victim had fought with him, He was mad, angry at something, and he took it out on the victim.
The murder was so violent that the police assume Betty's neighbors must have heard something.
We're having a very difficult time. We're not getting anyone within the apartment complex that's giving us anything. There were no screams. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unusual.
And apart from the vicious attack to the victim, there is nothing unusual in the apartment except for blood in the bathroom.
We found blood in the bathroom, and we found blood around the sink and also on the mirrors. We had made the assumption that our suspect had probably cleaned up there.
At first, it looks as if the killer came through the window, because the victim's window was removed and found leaning against the building. But a fingerprint found on the glass tells the police a very different story.
That fingerprint would have had to have been someone from the inside grabbing the window. The idea that if someone did jump in, they would have to grab a hold of the sill in order to pull themselves in. There would have had to been striations across that wooden sill from the body sliding across. There were no striations.
That leads police to believe Betty Cornish knew her killer.
We believe that that window was removed to draw us off because he was located so close to the victim.
So the police zero in on her boyfriend.
He found the body, he reported the crime. When we began to question him, he indicated that he had been out fishing that day. Some of the other investigators who were going around the apartment came into us to tell us that they found a set of clippers that a fisherman would typically use was located directly below the bedroom window of the victim. That became very suspicious to us because he said he had been fishing.
It was shocking, but I kind of thought that maybe it was the boyfriend, because I didn't know Paul that well.
Could he be the one who removed the window?
We started questioning her boyfriend more and more, and honestly, I believe he got scared.
Before police can further question him, he stops talking.
He asked for an attorney at the time. So we couldn't talk to him any further, and his attorney advised him not to speak with us or cooperate with us at any point.
Now, after 3 days and no hard leads, the people in town are uneasy.
This was the first murder that Belvedere had experienced in really 80 to 100 years. The people in the immediate area of Blair House Apartments were very, very scared at the time. There was a crowd of people that had watched what was going on, and there was fear that there might be more people in danger.
Everything, my whole complete life changed overnight. I didn't have a place to live anymore. I didn't have my mother to raise me anymore.
Nothing's ever normal again.
Residents in the apartment complex, eager to help the police, volunteer for polygraph tests, and they all pass. It seems as if the police have hit a wall.
The longer that a case goes on, your chances lessen greatly by the hour. It starts to scare you. There is a killer in the community, and you don't know where he is.
You imagine a monster. Only a monster could do something like that, and that's what we were afraid of. What kind of crazy person that could be out there?
I just wanted this person caught yesterday, you know. I remember calling the prosecutor's office. Did they find him yet? Did they find this person that killed my sister yet? That's when someone had told me about Nancy.
Nancy Weber is a psychic who claims to be able to see what most of us cannot.
It's not always in picture form. Sometimes it's sound, sometimes it's smells, sometimes it's vision, sometimes it's a feel of fabric.
8 days after her sister's murder, Peggy calls psychic Nancy Weber and sets up a meeting.
And she didn't want to know anything. Nancy didn't want to know anything. And she took me into this room and we began to talk.
I felt this horrible, heartbreaking misery.
Without any knowledge of the case, the psychic claims to tune in to Peggy's loss.
Somehow that connected inside me with she had sustained a great and tragic loss of a family member. She had a sister who was murdered.
And then she says something amazing.
I said to her that the chief suspect is a boyfriend. She said, yes. I said, he is not the killer.
But can the psychic see who the real killer is?
I saw a hammer. I saw a tied-up woman in her bed. I saw her brutally murdered. And I thought, that's the killer.
In Belvedere, New Jersey, it's been 8 days since 42-year-old Betty Cornish was found bludgeoned to death in her bed.
There is a killer in the community, and you don't know where he is.
Her boyfriend, who found the body, isn't talking, and the police have few hard leads.
I just wanted this person caught yesterday, you know.
Desperate to find the killer, the victim's sister asks a psychic for help. And the psychic has a vision of the murder, a vision so horrific, she feels she can only share it with the police.
I asked her to please contact the police involved. I said, let them speak with me, not you.
I received a call from Peggy Goebel. She told me that she had been talking to a woman who was a psychic. I'm skeptical, you know, when a psychic calls up or says that they have psychic ability. I want to hear who it is and what they have to say before I'm going to put a lot of faith into that individual.
But in this case, it's Nancy Weber.
So I said, okay, now I'm listening.
The detective and the psychic have worked together before on other cases.
I would be more than happy to bring her to the scene and get her thoughts, her feelings on what occurred here, because we're now beginning to get into a week into this case and we're getting nowhere.
No sooner do the detective and the psychic arrive at the scene than Nancy has a vision that will turn the investigation upside down.
I looked upstairs, and I saw a shadow, and I thought, that's the killer. He was going upstairs. He lives there. I pointed upstairs and said, the killer lives upstairs. I said, his first name's John, and last initial R.
She gave me the name John, and she gave me the initials JR.
The man upstairs is 30-year-old John Reese, a farm laborer who lives with his girlfriend and her 2 children.
He operated a piece of heavy equipment at the sod farm, just a working-class individual.
And I said, well, I'm not real sure that's the right guy, Nancy. He already passed a polygraph.
Not only has John Reese passed a polygraph, but he has an alibi for the time police think Betty was murdered.
Based on what the condition of the body and what we knew at that time, we were guessing that the time of death would have been somewhere around midnight. John Reese was able to tell us pretty specifically where he was during the entire day, right up until the point of about 2 o'clock in the morning, and at that point he went to bed. He alibied himself pretty well.
I said, that doesn't matter. It was such a strong feeling and strong vision.
At that point in my mind, I was beyond Mr. Reese. He passed a polygraph. She said that she didn't care, that, you know, polygraph him again, do what you have to do, but he's the guy.
Next, Detective Heater takes the psychic inside Betty Cornish's bedroom.
Crime scene hadn't been cleaned up. There was still blood spattered around. It was scary to walk in and not know what lay there.
As Nancy stands beside the victim's bed, she is hit with another vision.
Ben, I got the time of about 1:30 a.m. roughly.
Her vision puts the time of death much later than what the police say.
And this was one of the few times Dave actually responded to me and said, no, it was earlier. I said, no, wrong. Because I had a very strong impression of a time, and I had a very strong impression of a murderer.
Could the psychic be right? Could the killer be John Reese?
She made me think more. Like, I knew he was a suspect, but I was a suspect. Everybody was. So when she kept pushing it is when I started to believe it. They found it.
Passed the polygraph. She knew that he still did it.
He was there when the police arrived. He was there when the detectives arrived. He was there when they removed the body. And he was just there. Every time someone would look, there was John Reese.
It's the psychic's final vision that turns the investigation on its head.
I see this blur of a metallic buckle that I am told in my mind is a Western belt buckle that has meaning and value to John Reese.
Heater sends an investigator to see if Nancy is right.
Reese, in fact, had the belt buckle and was very consistent with everything that Nancy had described.
With this new piece of information, Detective Heater goes out on a limb and takes a second look at the man upstairs.
I, as a supervisor, at least now at this point, had some kind of justification in my own mind for spending man hours on a man who already passed a polygraph.
He decides to take a gamble on a psychic's vision.
My boss basically told me I was crazy.
Heater sends detectives to question Reese again.
Reese was very comfortable with these two detectives and was willing to talk to them every day. They became almost like friends. And because of that investigative bond, Reese started talking about more things.
Detective Tom Trainer was one of the officers investigating Reese.
He gave information that caused us to believe that he might have been in the victim's apartment. It wasn't a real credible account of how or why he was in there, and of course, meanwhile, one of our ID men had developed, the latent prints off the front window.
11 days after the murder, the first solid piece of damning evidence. The fingerprint belongs to John Reese.
Trainer went after Reese again and told him, look, we've got your fingerprint on the window. What's the story? Oh, well, we're friends, Betty and I would come down there and, the window would get stuck. So, I would help her unjam the window to get it closed.
John Reese said that he was there to fix the window, and the window never got stuck. He had to put a stick underneath it to hold it up because it wouldn't stay stuck.
Another break. The medical examiner revises the time of death. Betty Cornish didn't die at midnight as the police thought. She died much later.
We got results back from the medical examiner's office, which gave us a time of death more into the early morning hours.
Just as the psychic told police at a time when Reese has no alibi.
The biggest problem that we had was the time period in the 3 o'clock to 3:30 in the morning area. We felt that there was something he was holding back.
We had his fingerprint from inside the apartment. We knew that he was lying to us at this point in time.
But the police have to make a case that will stand up in court. They need the murder weapon. Can the psychic help?
I saw a swamp, and so I told him, this is where you'll find the hammer.
Thanks to a psychic's vision. Police in Belvedere, New Jersey now have a prime suspect in the brutal killing of a 42-year-old nurse.
I pointed upstairs and said, the killer lives upstairs.
But they don't have enough hard evidence to arrest him. They need the murder weapon, and the psychic claims she knows where it is.
Suddenly saw this small body of messy, muddy water and the hammer falling into it. I thought, he dropped it in there.
Nancy, when she returned to our office, she drew us a map.
Took a piece of paper and drew my crude map and handed it to them and said, this is where you'll find the hammer.
She gave us a road, she gave us a patch that she said were woods, and she said, and over in this corner is water. And she said, I see Reese throwing the hammer into the woods.
But she can't tell the police where that water is located. At the same time, detectives continue to badger their prime suspect, determined to find cracks in his story.
He was able to give detailed information about, when he made the coffee, when he got up in the morning to go to work, and what time he left for work. But then the time when we felt that the victim was murdered was a time that he didn't recall. He just breezed right over it.
Reese started talking about more things. And those things that he kept adding into his statement during the times was things that were off, that were not talked about before.
There's a lot of little things that he changes in his behavior between, deep breaths. You could tell something is bothering him. And we just felt at that point that he was ready to tell us something.
Detectives make their move. They bring Reese in.
We hit him with all the things that we knew, walked around the table, sat down next to him, looked him in the eye, and said, John, We know you did it, and you know you did it. Now why don't you tell us about it? Approximately 20 to 25 minutes, perhaps half an hour later, Detective Traynor came out of that room and advised us that he had confessed to the murder.
I believe he knew that we knew that he was the killer, and for some reason he had to share that with us. It's hard to picture why or how, but something made him realize that, it was wrong and that he had to trust us and that he did it and he had to admit that.
There was a hammer on the floor that I picked up, and I hit her once in the head with it. I hit her 2, 3, 4 times with the hammer. Large amount of blood flowed on the bed, some on the walls. And I went upstairs. Garbage bag. Washed up my hand and everything. Had another beer and went to bed.
Later, he told the police he dumped the hammer at the farm where he works.
When we did the search through the woods and we came out, there was the water in front of us. Water where Nancy said there would be water. We went in, we recovered the hammer, photographed it, brought it out, bagged it, tagged it, and put it into evidence.
18 days after beating Betty Cornish to death, John Reese is charged with her murder.
And I remember just my mother and father and I embracing and jumping up and down, happy that they caught him, but realizing that it just wouldn't bring her back.
Despite the confession, Reese later pleads not guilty. At the trial, his lawyers suggest Betty Cornish invited Reese into her apartment.
It was very hard because we would have to sit and see the murderer there every day.
A lot of the time, Mr. Reese basically propped his head on his hand and just seemed somewhat disinterested for the most part. He didn't want to show any expression to the jury, so he just basically sat like he was bored.
And he would, constantly turn his head and look at us. I remember my mother being there, and she was crying. It was hard for her to hold back her cries, and they wanted to put her out of the room. They didn't want the jurors to see my mother crying because it would sway their decision.
The jury doesn't believe John Reese's story. What they do believe is that sometime around 3 a.m., Reese came downstairs and snuck into Betty Cornish's apartment, bound her wrists with an extension cord, sexually assaulted her, and beat her to death, striking her at least 21 times with a hammer. After a 5-week trial, Reese is found guilty of all 11 charges, including first-degree murder. He is sentenced to 110 years.
I would like him to say he was sorry. I would like him to show some remorse because he never has.
I think that if he were to say anything, that he would try to hurt us in some way because he is sick enough. He got 2 life sentences. He's eligible for parole in 45 years. So that means that he will be 72.
Or dead.
Or dead. And we will fight so that he dies in prison.
Why was the psychic so convinced that it was the man upstairs who killed Betty Cornish? He had already passed a lie detector test, yet she remained adamant her vision was correct. She knew his initials were J.R. and his first name was John. She also knew that he wore a large Western-style belt buckle. She even directed the police toward the murder weapon.
Nancy was probably one of the driving forces that kept me going back to Reese. I was willing to give him up, but she was very insistent.
Any constructive thing I can do assists Elizabeth and her soul and assists her family.
And whether you want to call it spiritual matter, whatever it is that a psychic sees, you've got to be able to believe in it. There's science, there may be the supernatural. I don't know how to explain what a psychic does, how they do it. All I know is it works.